glorious day in the greenhouse today. Just looking over my tomato plants and some of my other starts out here. It's finally getting beautiful enough out that I can start putting my stuff out into the greenhouse. We heat the greenhouse in the morning, and on the cloudy days, we heat it. But when the sun is out like this, I still have the heater running on low just to make sure. But if the temperature gets too high, I'll shut the heater off. But it's a beautiful day out here in the greenhouse. I'd like to talk about a few things today since we've got our seeds planted, they're coming up, we're starting to transplant, and now what do we do with them to keep them healthy and going strong? There's 4 things I would like to talk about today, and one of them is insufficient light and the effects of how that affects your plant by not having enough light. And underwatering and overwatering, those are always 2 big issues. Is, how much water to give them? Am I giving them too much water? And then when you're up potting your plants, choosing the right seedlings to plant, to go with for the season, to get your best growth. And airflow. I'd like to talk a little bit about airflow on the plants and how to prevent some of the problems that can come from a lack of airflow. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to give you an update on the tomatoes and a few tips to do with your tomato plants at this stage. So I hope you enjoy the video, and let's get started. Today we're going to talk about light for your plants, really insufficient light for your plants. It's a problem area for some people. If you go on social media and different places like that, you'll see pictures of, they'll post pictures of their leggy plants, and they got these long, thin little stems, and they're all falling over, and they're laying on the tray, and they look about dead. That's called a leggy plant. And what you get leggy plants from is not enough light. The intensity of the light is not enough. Your grow lights are too far away, or you've got them in a window that gets light but not a lot of sun, or it's only getting sun for an hour or 2 a day, and then the rest of the time it's just getting light. And the plant stretches for that light because they need it, and they stretch it and they thin out. The stem gets real long, the leaves get real far apart, and it gets really weak and it just falls over. What plants need, they need photosynthesis for growth. And what photosynthesis does is it converts the carbon dioxide in the water for the plant into energy. And really it's like sugar. And then that feeds the roots. So if you have insufficient light, you don't have enough photosynthesis, it's not converting enough energy for the plant is what's happening. And what that does when it doesn't produce enough energy and it's not feeding the roots is it's causing a stunted growth or real slow growth in your plants. And what happens is you get a reduced root length on your plant, and really what you're getting is you're reducing the hair roots on the plant, the root mass on your plant. And the hair roots is what takes up the nutrition for your plant. And if you're compromising the roots, and particularly the hair roots, the plant is not able to take up enough nutrition for the plant, and it slows the growth, it stunts the growth. You will start to see smaller and smaller leaves. And then the light produces the chlorophyll for the plant, which gives it the green color in your leaves. And if it's not getting enough, you get pale leaves. They're lighter green, they're not that nice dark green how they should be. They can start turning yellow, or sometimes they'll even bleach white because they just don't have the chlorophyll, they don't have the color for it. And you'll notice too that maybe your bottom leaves are starting to fall off. They turn yellow when they start falling off. That's, you're not photosynthesizing. You're not feeding that root the energy that it needs. The root is not taking up the nutrition that it needs, and your plant is kind of starving. And, it all comes down to, it reduces the nutritional uptake on your plant. And it also, what it does is it creates a real moist environment, because your soil's really not drying out, because it doesn't have enough light, it doesn't have enough evaporation on the soil, and it creates a breeding ground for fungal diseases, which you'll see what really comes out a lot as a fungal disease on a young little seedling is called dampening off. And dampening off likes cool, damp environment, cool, wet environment. And you can come out one day and one morning or whatever, and you look at your little plants and they all fell over. And where the stem comes out of the soil, it looks like it was pinched off. It's like just melting away, and your plant falls over and dies. That's called dampening off. And that's caused from not enough light, too wet conditions. And you put that together, and it activates the funguses in the soil, and it attacks your little plant. So in the low light, insufficient light or low light, it really stresses out your plant. I see where they put these grow lights are way up here. And I only keep my grow lights an inch or two above the plant. And as soon as you see that seedling germinate, let me see if I can find one here that's germinating. Like right here, you see that little green right here? It's just germinating. And this is when you want to get it underneath your lights with your lights right over the top of it, so that it's not stretching, it's getting enough light, it's photosynthesizing, it's getting the chlorophyll, so it's going to have a nice color. Your roots are going to grow because it's being fed. If you have that light way up high, that little plant is going to shoot right up and try to get to that light because it wants to be fed. And it gets just long, thin stems, and the plant's never going to produce right. What you do with your little plants when they're smaller affects what happens to the plant in the end. You'll get reduced flowering on your plant. You'll get reduced plant size. You will get reduced fruit. Instead of growing a cabbage head this big, you might grow a cabbage head this big. Or instead of getting 50 tomatoes on your plant, you might get 10 tomatoes on your plant. But you just have to be real careful what happens with them when they're small, and making sure that they get enough nutrition, that their root system is growing, and they have enough light. Another common question that I've heard and I've been asked is, Dee, I don't have enough grow lights. And I get it. We're off grid, so our grow lights are at a premium here. I have to start stuff in stages. Once I can get my greenhouse heated, my stuff that I start earlier, like my tomatoes and peppers and celery and herbs and things like that you have to start earlier, I get them started underneath my grow lights early, and then they go out to the greenhouse, and then I start my other stuff like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, some cucumbers, stuff that I don't need to start in February, that I can wait and start till March, beginning of April. And by that time I can get my greenhouse heated. So I've got those plants out in the greenhouse getting the light, and these plants under my grow lights. So, but what I get asked is, I don't have enough grow lights, and then they'll start everything at one time. And what they want to know if they can put this group of plants underneath the grow lights today and then swap them out the next day or a couple days later for another group of plants. And they rotate their plants in and out from underneath of the grow lights. So one day they're sitting on the kitchen table or they're sitting on the floor without the light, and you know, the next day or two they're underneath the grow lights. That's still insufficient light. Your seedlings need 12 to 18 hours of light every single day. And so by swapping them in and out from underneath of your grow lights, you're stressing the plant, and it has the same thing as if the light's too far away. It's not photosynthesizing like they should be. Your leaves are going to get smaller and smaller. The new leaves coming out are going to get smaller and smaller. They're going to start paling in color because they don't have the chlorophyll. So either way, it isn't going to do your plants any favors. And it's a lot of, you know, gardening takes a lot of time and effort, and it can take a lot of money. You know, soil's not cheap, fertilizers aren't cheap. Running your grow lights certainly is not cheap on your electric bill or your off-grid system. It costs me extra gas in my generator to run my grow lights. You know, so if you're gonna put all that time and energy into it, you want the best plant that you can get. But that is the effects of insufficient light or low light, not enough light. Watering is always an issue. And how much do you water? If you're watering too little, are you watering too much? We're going to talk about underwatering first. Underwatering your plant, you can usually tell right away if you're underwatering your plant. If you come out and your plant, you got a droopy plant, and it's not up nice and perky like this. It's all like drooped down. You know, the leaves look real wilty. You know, they'll just hang straight down. And your soil will be really dry. That would be an underwatered plant. You'll know right away. What you want to do is water that plant right away. Not only will the plant look droopy, if you consistently underwater your plants and you let them dry out on a consistent basis to where they're drooping a lot, and then you give them a big drink of water and then they dry out again, and then they're all droopy again, and this cycle just continues. What happens with that is the roots start shrinking on the plant, and they'll actually become brittle. And once that happens, that root can no longer take up any nutrition. And you know, your plant's gonna fail. It's not gonna grow. You're gonna stunt the growth because it can't, anything that affects the nutrition of the plant stunts the growth. And long-term underwatering, consistent underwatering will do that because it'll affect your roots. But what's more common with your starts is overwatering. Overwatering, you will get oh boy, the sun's coming. You will get a real dense soil, a soggy, dense soil, and it's going to feel real heavy, and it's going to look like it's real compacted, which it is. And what your plant is with that is actually starved of oxygen. The plant needs air, the roots need air movement, and in your soil mix, that's why you have what they call perlite in there. That's a little white styrofoam looking things, and it creates air gaps for water to drain through and for oxygen to come in by the roots. But if you're overwatering, it's just going to compact everything down, and you're going to start starving the plant. And then what happens is the roots are sitting in all that compacted moisture with that soil compacted hard on them, and they're going to start to rot. And you'll know you're getting root rot if your plant is really wet and it's watered, but it still looks wilted, because the soil is wet, but the roots aren't taking up the moisture, so the plant is actually dry even though the soil is wet, if that makes sense. And what you get, it's just a breeding ground for fungal diseases. You know, again, you know, the dampening off is the main one that you're going to get. It just breeds it out of the soil, especially if the temperatures are cooler. So you might ask, well, how do you know how much to water? You know, when do you water and how much do you water? What I do is I get used to picking my plants up. When I water them, I pick them up and I feel them, and the pot should feel heavy. And as the plant is drying out, that pot will get lighter and lighter. And what you want to do is check your plants to see how heavy they are. And once you get a feel for it, you'll know. The trick is to let it dry out enough, the pot gets light enough, but your plant isn't wilting from being underwatered. And when you get to that point of you think it's about right, then you water the plant. Another thing you can do is put your finger into the soil, 1/2 inch to 1 inch. And if it feels dry, an inch down, if it still feels real dry, you can go ahead and water that plant. Here is at the perfect time to water it. The top of the soil is dry. I can go down about 1 inch and it's still dry. Once I've got them in the pots like this, I water them from the top because it's unrealistic for me to water them from the bottom. When I have them in trays like these, I water them from the bottom. I put about 1 inch of water in the bottom of the tray and let it soak it up. And when I see that the top of the soil is starting to get a little moist, I drain any excess water out of the tray. Even your trays, you know, your little plants in your trays, pick them up and see how heavy they are. You know, see how far down they're dry on the top, and that's when you would water the plant. And once you get a system for that, and you can, you know, tell when the plant is dried out enough, but not dried out to the point the plant wilts, that's your perfect time to water it. You know, the key is to keep them evenly moist, not soggy, and not overly dry. And you will have, your roots will grow in an optimum level. They won't stunt, and your plant is just going to flourish. Another area I want to talk about is when you're potting up your plants, choosing what plant to keep and what plant to not keep. I have some banana peppers here, and see, here's one right here. This plant, this seedling right here is a nice big seedling. This seedling right here, there's 4 of them in here. This little guy right here, he's never going to do anything. I wouldn't plant him. He's going to grow really slow. He's not going to produce much fruit. He's a weak plant. He didn't germinate well. He didn't start out good. You know, and if you look at him compared to this other one, you know, there's a big difference. You know, I would plant, this guy would be my first pick I would put in a transplant. And these other 2, I would probably plant them. But this guy here, I would just pull him out of there. And I wouldn't bother with him because he's not going to do a lot for you. This guy here, these 2 here, especially this one back here, I probably would not plant that one. But what I did is I purposely, on my tomatoes, I planted one that was a small little seedling, and one that wasn't. And they're the same seeds in the same soil, started at the same time. And this is where this plant is today. And this is where this plant is. Same. Started at the same time. This was a more robust plant in the seed starting tray, and this one was not. And as you see, this plant here is not doing well, and it's probably never going to. So I would not waste my time, energy, and my resources on a little weak seedling that came up weak. When you're choosing what to pot up, choose your stronger seedlings, because you'll get a stronger plant. Some of these were started earlier than others. See, I only plant my strongest seedlings, and I get nice stems, you know, nice plants. But that's thinning your seedlings correctly to get the best produce in the end. Another area you want to pay attention to is your airflow. Not getting enough airflow. And what that does is, when you water your plants, if your plants are real tight together, you know, the pots are sitting, you know, one right on top, real tight together, as your plants get bigger, it creates a canopy on the top. And what that does is it holds the humidity in underneath of those plants, because it can't escape out from the top of the canopy. And this happens when you've potted up your plants, you know, you got them in the seeds. You can put a lot of seeds in a big tray, but when they have to be potted up, they go into a bigger pot, and then you can't fit as many on your shelf. And so what people have a tendency to do is just cram them all in there to try to get them as many under the light as they possibly can, because they have too many plants for their light system and their shelving. And so they cram them all together so they're real tight, and then it forms like a canopy over the top. But when you water that plant, that humidity has no place to go. And what that does is it causes what they call edema on your plant. And edema is when your plant absorbs more water than it can transpire or get rid of. And then actually what happens is, mostly on the underside of your leaves and sometimes on the stems, you'll get these blisters that come out on the bottom of your leaves, underneath your leaves. And they'll actually break open, and it's swelling. It's like it's retained water, and the plant is swelling, and then the cells break, and then what you end up with is a kind of a quirky, scaly looking spots underneath your leaves. And those leaves usually end up turning yellow and falling off anyway. But it's not good for the plant. It restricts the light from coming down into the plant, and then it's back to the insufficient light. Even though they're underneath the light, just the very tops of them are getting light, but it's not getting light underneath the plant, on top of the soil, and it'll stunt it. It starts affecting the roots, and anything that affects the roots stunts the plant. And so what you want to do to prevent that is, one, make sure you're not overwatering, and space your plants out. You can see my tomato plants look like they're a little bit close together, and they are, but they're not to the point of creating a solid canopy on the top. You know, I've got spaces in between here, you know, airflow spaces where this humidity can come out, and, you know, the plant can breathe. But that's a real common problem that people have, and it's just caused from not enough airflow. You can run a fan on low on your plants, which is really good for them. It increases the airflow, and it creates a stronger stem, so your plants are, the stems of your plants are stronger. But if you have your plants spaced out right and not so tight that it's created a canopy on the top, they're going to get enough airflow and that edema is not going to happen. Another thing that overcrowding your plants you get is it's a breeding ground for mold and fungus, and then you get back to the dampening off problem. So if you space them out correctly, you avoid a host of problems. And so we've covered the lighting, the problems with insufficient light. We've went through underwatering, overwatering, thinning your plants right, picking which plant to plant, which ones not to plant, and then creating enough airflow for your plants. Those are really the critical areas with growing seedlings. If you can get those areas under control, you'll grow a nice seedling. And since we're here by the tomatoes, I would like to give you a little update on the tomatoes from my potting video, which I'll have linked at the end of the video. These are the tomatoes that I potted on that video, which they are doing absolutely beautiful. A few things you want to watch on your plants when they're getting to this size is, like, this plant here is he's pretty strong. He's got a strong stem. But if he had a weaker stem and I thought he wanted to tip over, now's the time that I would stake in here for him to keep him from bending over on me. At this stage of my tomato plants, I don't call them a seedling anymore. These are what I call plants. They went from the seedling stage to the plant stage. And I've potted them up into bigger pots. They're in about a 1 gallon pot. And at this stage is when I start fertilizing them with full strength fertilizer, whatever fertilizer you're using. I use a tomato fertilizer for them. And instead of giving them half strength fertilizer, I start giving them full strength at this stage. Another thing you're going to see at this stage of tomatoes, if I can find one here, is they're going to start, here's one, they're going to start getting flower buds on them. And what you want to do with these is you want to snip them off. I know that doesn't sound like, well, don't you want tomatoes, Steve? Why are you snipping the flowers off? When they're young like this and they're growing, if you let the flowers stay on at this young age, it's going to set fruit, and those flowers will open up and they're going to turn into tomatoes. And it signals to the plant that the plant's coming full circle, and it's going to slow way down on growth because it's going to put all of its energy now into that tomato it's trying to produce. And you don't want that at this stage of tomato plants. You want your tomato plants to grow, to fill out. You're starting to see, some people call these suckers. They are suckers. They're starting to come in. But you want that plant to grow, to keep growing, and you want it to fill out and start turning into a nice, robust plant. A couple of years ago, I had somebody question that because I told them that, and they questioned cutting the blooms off their tomatoes because these are determinate tomatoes. And they said they're only going to get so many tomatoes. Why am I cutting the blooms off? Well, if you don't, you're only going to get so many tomatoes. And that's true. A determinate plant produces so many tomatoes, but it's how you prune them as to how many tomatoes you get. And as the plant gets bigger and we continue on with our tomatoes, I'll go over how to prune a determinate tomato plant to get the most amount of tomatoes off of it. But these early blooms, you want to snip them off and let that plant grow. Now when I get in the greenhouse, I grow my plants all in pots. And when I get that plant ready, when it goes into its regular pot, it's going to go in for the year, it's usually getting pretty filled out. Because they'll go from these 1 gallon pots to a 3 gallon pot to my regular pot. And once I've got them filled out nice, and they're in their regular pot and they've adjusted and they're doing well, then I let them bloom. And then at that point in time is a real critical time to give them some phosphorus fertilizer, because that will just produce a lot of blooms. But we'll go over that. So you want to, at this stage, you want to full strength fertilizer about every 10 days. And you want to snip off any of these flower blooms that you see coming, these little flower clusters. You want to go through and you want to keep them snipped off right now and let them grow.